Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Pod Theory. This is your host, Jason Cercone, and today we're going to take a look at 7 easy ways to hone your podcast hosting skills. Now, if this is your first foray into the podcasting game and your first time hosting a podcast, it can seem like a pretty daunting task on the surface. One of the most vital elements that you want to remember when hosting a podcast is to be yourself. Let your personality shine through with each and every episode that you do. It may feel a little intimidating to have a mic in front of you, but remember that you're only talking to the people in the room that are with you. Or if you're by yourself, you're basically just talking to yourself. The point is that you're not presenting to a huge room of people as if you were giving a presentation. Ideally, as your podcast grows, your audience is going to grow and thousands of people are going to hear what you have to say. But as you're recording, it's just you and the people in the room with you. So that can help bring down that level of fear to some degree. It's all about finding your comfort level. And to do that, I'm going to give you 7 easy ways that you can get comfortable being a host, get comfortable being on the mic, and ultimately start to shape and mold the skill set that you're going to need to be a very successful podcast host. Number 1, to overcome the initial nervousness that you may have, do some practice recordings. Interview a friend, interview a family member, or just record something solo. Once you finish that recording, take some time to listen to it back. Don't worry about editing. Just listen to the raw file. Take some notes on what you like about your delivery and where you'd like to make some changes. And after that, practice some more. You'll be amazed how quickly your comfort level increases the more you get in front of the microphone and just start talking. Just start putting some content together. Number 2, listen to your favorite podcasts and focus on how the host delivers their message. This is something you can go back and listen to podcasts that you've listened to before or listen to fresh shows that just released. Focus on the delivery of the host, not so much the content. And that's going to help you see why that podcast is so good and why it appeals to you. You're going to want to mirror that host as much as possible. And by listening to that host do their delivery and put their shows out there, it's going to give you more of an idea of how you want to present yourself as a host as well. Number 3, staying in that same ballpark, listen to radio talk shows and watch television talk shows and newscasts and study the delivery of those hosts. This, combined with step number 2, is going to give you a very well-rounded approach of how you want to deliver your message when you start to put your podcast together. Number 4, don't worry about making mistakes. If you mess something up in the initial recording, that's okay. You can edit that out later. You and the people involved with your show are going to be the only ones that know that that mistake took place. Number 5, listen to the responses that your guest provides. Now, in many cases, they may answer another question that you were planning to ask at a later point. If they cover that in detail, you don't want to ask them again because they don't want to have to repeat themselves, and it makes it look like you're not paying attention to what they have to say. By listening to the answers closely, you're going to naturally generate some follow-up questions that you hadn't thought of before when you made your initial list of bullet points, and we're going to talk about that in a quick second. The most entertaining and worthwhile podcasts always come from a conversation versus just a straight interview. So have a conversation with your guest. It will keep you loose, and as a result, it's going to make for a much better final product. Number 6, silence is your friend. This is a mantra that I always think about whenever I'm recording a podcast. If you need to pause at any point or after your guest answers a question and before you transition to the next topic or the next point that you want to cover, take that pause. You can always edit the silence to make it a more natural length between speaking points in post-production. So don't worry about taking some time to gather your thoughts and think about what you want to say next and overall where you want the show to go from that last speaking point. It's your show. You're driving the bus. If you need to take a second to think about where you want to go next, take that second. It's going to make things much better than just trying to stammer through anything that's in front of you from a script perspective, because you may lose some good opportunities for follow-up on what your guest just said because you were just looking at your script and thinking about where you wanted to go next. So use silence to your advantage. Take a moment when you need it, and then edit it when it comes into post-production. And finally, number 7, this may seem like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised how many hosts skip this step. Know your subject matter before you start recording. Do research on the topics of discussion that you'll be covering on your show. Research your guests. Make bullet points of important information that you want to cover and any pressing questions that you want to ask your guest. Now, your podcast it should be focused on something that you're very passionate about. So you may think that you have everything in your mind as you go into recording, but as you get into the heat of that conversation, you may forget some important things. So it's always good to prepare before you go into that interview and make some simple notes and be ready. Do not try to half-ass it. Now, one thing you want to remember is that the more you do this, the more comfortable you're going to become. The better you're going to get at this. Hosting a podcast is not unlike anything else in the world. Practice makes perfect. So do not hesitate. Get out there and start podcasting today. You'll be glad you did. So that's going to wrap up today's installment of Pod Theory. Please take a minute to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to grab my free podcast primer that will help you get your podcast on the right track from day one. Snag it today at jasoncercone.com/podcast primer. Until we meet again next time, this has been Jason Cercone on Pod Theory.